What's up, everybody? It's your favorite Bob the Builder's favorite nerd, and today we are talking about the 1/12 scale Jabbas Palace that Joe KW, who's right here next to me.
Yeah, what's up?
And I built for one of the Billy shows. So all of this was done in like 40-minute videos that we put on the Nerd Rage Patreon. For those that contribute there, it was like a real behind-the-scenes kind of journey through it, and it's not all of it's sped up, and you can kind of hear the conversations and stuff. It's pretty entertaining. But this is like an abridged version of the process, and all of it sped up at least 2 times, if not 8 times. So what we did here was we showed a little behind the scenes footage of like the planning process. So what we usually do is get out a couple of like the cross sections books, we get out a couple of like photo references, we get a tape measure, we get some wax paper, we get some pens, and we start drawing out to scale 1 centimeter equals 1 inch.
Yeah.
And mapping out how we're going to have it in there. Joe handles the numbers, and I handle the vision, is usually how it goes.
Yep. Yeah. Usually he has a clear idea of what he wants. It's not always a duplicate of the scene precise, but to capture the spirit of. And we have to try to get as much detail as we can in the shelf space.
I knew early on that there was going to be a couple challenges, like the armrest, the gargoyle heads, and some of the chains and lights and stuff in the background, little like nuance and ambiance stuff. So, but at this point, we kind of like threw caution to the wind, and we're like, we'll cross those bridges as we get there. We're just going to work on kind of mapping it out now. I probably should have made this shorter, but what are you going to do? We only got a few seconds left, ladies and gents. Just bear with us.
Like this matters a lot because you want to maximize the area for which figures can stand on too. So that's why we do all the steps and all the walls and stuff before worrying about the little details.
Yeah, we're always thinking about adding layers of height so that the figures can display well. And then it's the cutting process. So we used a multiple kind of degrees or thickness, inches of thickness of foam. We have this really little itty bitty like 1/4 inch. It's maybe even less than 1/4 inch foam. Yeah. That we use for like the floor plates, the back plate, and the side walls. And like this step is just kind of grueling. It's just
it's really hard to cut, especially the thicker foam, to cut like straight. Like it really matters because each shelf, even though they are identical, if you go and measure your IKEA shelves, they're not all exactly the same. So in order for these things to fit, every single one is fit to the shelf.
Correct. And we also we always build this like the same way. We start on the outside and work in. So we always start with the floor, back walls, side walls, and then slowly build like from the out in. Just because when you get every time that there's like always little things you never account for, and every time that you start laying in pieces, you realize you're working with a little bit less space here, a little bit less space there. So even though like the obvious fun of this particular diorama is to do the throne was one of the last things we ended up doing because there's just no sense in jumping right to the fun when you don't know how all the rest of it is going to play out. That's my melon right there. That's my shadow of my melon.
I didn't even notice.
It's like distracting to me now. But we use like a little little T-square, and sometimes we don't even we just line it up with it. If we get a really good line, we'll just line that up with it instead of measuring out the other line, because at least we know it's straight. Making straight lines is difficult, and all of it really depends on having a straight line. So it's like the devil's in the details, like everything else. Also, I always have Joe do the harder cuts. He has a steadier hand, as you might imagine, than I do, and
just a little more experience on working on things like this.
And he has meticulous fingers. He can get in those little nooks and crannies.
This is exactly what it looks like in the factories of the toys that is building your.
Those little pieces, like, and I'm always hesitant. Like all these little, if you look at all these, I'm pointing to the screen that you can see it, but all these little like chips of blocks and stuff on the floor, I'm always hesitant to throw stuff like that out, because a lot of times you just, like, as you're doing something, you're like, man, if I just had a little square, I could just throw in right here. So like I have like bags and bags and bags of little scraps to use.
We also have a much better, well, we haven't used it yet, but we've set up a better workspace than this.
Yeah, I'm anxious to get started on it. Your work schedule is hopefully going to slow down here in a couple of weeks, and we can get cranking on something new. I think we're going to do a bat cave next, a 1/12 bat cave. That's Joe's feet.
Pieces for it, though, right? Are you getting?
I don't think so.
Scratch building the whole thing.
Yeah.
Get some plastic pipes.
I don't know.
Railings and stuff.
Yeah, I got to look at railings, and I want to look at like floor grates and stuff like that.
Yeah,
but there's options out there.
From, Evergreen is a brand that makes really good plastic stuff in variety of shapes and sizes.
Yeah, we also had a novelty idea this time to not crouch down like on furnitureless floor like a bunch of homeless people. We decided to go to a table and make these small little cuts. Now, we had a hard time with the steps because the steps that go around Jabbas Throne on both sides, because we wanted enough steps where we could display enough figures, but also to have like the right amount of height between steps where it seemed real world. And we couldn't find a foam that was the exact thickness. So what we did, we just took the little foam and doubled it up one on top of the other so that it would kind of create the right size. And it's not the most beautiful in the world, but it's extremely effective. And I think in the midst of looking at the diorama, you don't notice that it's just stacks and it doesn't look as sloppy as it kind of is in a way.
I think it works out too because Jabbas Palace is not like a polished like military base. You know, it's rocky. It's kind of cavey looking. So I think it works out fine.
It was actually tricky to kind of see how the thing was laid out anyway. Like a lot of the cross-section books and a lot of even the film references, it's like it's such a dark place that it's hard to kind of see exactly how it's laid out. And ours isn't 100% accurate. But if it were to have been 100% accurate, it would have pushed out the throne further into the shelf and not given us a little extra display space in front of the throne.
Yeah, it's a trade-off. Like what you want, really. If you only want Jabba and Princess Leia and maybe 2 figures on there, then you can build an elaborate diorama. But if you want to fit a bunch of people in there, you're gonna have to give somewhere. Yeah,
and it's a matter of utility and having to make compromises in order to look at me throwing in pieces.
Do something.
To make compromises in order to have the most accurate and kind of most display space. And even like Jabba's throne ends up taking up so much space, even on a Billy, which I use for most of this collection. I use an IKEA Billy, and Jabba's throne takes up so much of the real estate already that like you get 2 for 1 on there because you get Leia on the throne with him, but then you got to have 3PO, you got to have Bib Fortuna, you got to have space for a lot of other guys, and Jawa, there's a Jawa on the throne as well in some scenes, so like we have a Jawa on there. But it's just one of those things. So we also, as a heads up, we try to cut out as much stuff as we can in the beginning and start gluing down as much big pieces so that we get a rough layout. And I like to paint as much separate as I can, but there is, and this is a matter of preference, there is a matter of finding the fine line that works for you, because like this, which we'll get to real quick, is a lot more challenging to kind of paint and deal with. So I didn't want to have this connected to the stage because that would have been a nightmare. So we kind of did this in one section. But this was a cut that Joe definitely had to make. Do you want to talk about this at all?
I mean, it's just patience and doing it in small cuts. You see, I'm not going to make the whole cut all the way around. I'm going to do it in little blocks. I make the round cut, and then I cut. It's hard to explain, but you'll see it. I'll cut it in sections so that I'm ripping off a block at a time and not the whole piece. With things like this, you really need a guide, first of all, to make it even and make a smooth cut. You need a sharp knife, and I always tell people you have to get a sharpener, because you don't realize how fast your knife dulls. After 3 cuts, your knife is basically not good anymore.
So like this, I knew that I was going to need assistance, because this is the sort of thing that I would manhandle and snap into 1,000 pieces. And we've moved this diorama like 3 or 4 times now, and it's still holding strong, no problems. But the arch is one of those things. It's like a real iconic piece to his throne room. And once again, it's not 100% accurate, but it's accurate in the spirit, and your brain kind of fills in the rest that's not accurate and ends up being true enough where it works. Like his isn't as wide as of an oval, but we have wider display stage steps so that you can have characters fit in there. And once again, it's that compromise of function and utility. Joe fixing his shorts.
I didn't want to have to look at my junk.
But yeah, this is the kind of stuff that like, it's like knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. So I'll let Joe handle this. But like, as you can see, like this, the front, the back, and the underside of the arch all has to be painted. And it's not impossible. It wouldn't have been impossible to paint this had it been connected to the main base of the diorama, but it's just easier to go ahead and paint it separately, and it doesn't have to be secured in because the tension between the height of the shelf is going to keep it in place. So you might as well paint it separately and give yourself, like, set yourself up for success, I think is the kind of phrase to use for it, so that you can have the ability to paint it freely and maneuver around it easily in order to paint it, and then you can just put it in location once it's dry, and you don't have to fight with yourself just because it's hard, though, because you're excited about putting it together, so you want to put it together, but it's hard to fight that urge in order to paint it as well as you can and then have it put together at the end, but you just don't get that payoff until much later on.
One of the things with wanting to put it together fast is that you have to take into account the gluing, like we were talking about earlier. Glue it as much as you can, because I don't know what other people use, but we use wood glue, which works really well. It's a permanent bond, but it takes like forever to dry. So either you can do all your cutting, and at the end of the session, when you're done for the day, glue everything together so you come back to it the next day, or you cut and glue as you go. So like by the time you finish a few things, you might be able to go back to the first thing, and definitely get something heavy to weigh it down, because the foam is light and does not want to stay together.
Yeah. And we also knew that we were going to put in this like design around the archway that we show a little bit of later, but we don't show a whole lot of it. But like, just as a heads up, like I ended up drilling that out with a Dremel, and I did it outside this time as to not breathe in all those fumes. And I think I even put my face in my shirt. Just like I'm so paranoid about it now. But there it is, nice, clean.
So I was talking about with patience. Like we sped this up. I don't know how long that actually took me, but it takes that long to get a nice cut.
Yeah. And then, so this is the barbecue. This was something that posed a challenge early on. The barbecue sits behind Jabba, and I looked all over the place. I was going to buy a 3D printed one. I was going to try to make one myself. I was coming up with all these ideas, and in the end, I just thought that you're just not going to see enough of it where it doesn't need to be perfect, so I ended up just making it out of foam. So I took the thin pieces. I used a protractor, basically, and I set the circle of the protractor in. I made a circle, and then I measured up a certain, like 2 inches or whatever, and then made a line across so that it could have the right shape. And then I laid that on top of another piece, cut that piece out, and then I had the two side pieces. Then I made the middle piece, and then I made the two kind of accent decorative things that sit on the corners of each side. And that's what I'm doing here. And this is like, this thinner one has a plastic coating on one side of the styrofoam, which can be a pain in the nuts to kind of cut through. So I was trying to get rid of that as I could.
Yeah, it gives it a way of painting too.
Oh yeah, and then I cut one square out of the center and put a larger rectangle piece underneath, so it looked like I could put like a little fire pit. And I put sand and stuff in there before I painted it, so it was like, charcoal or whatever in the fire pit. This is me gluing those pieces together. I'm using and it's just like it's just a workaround, and it's like I'm not the smartest person in the room. I rarely am, but this was a pretty smart way of doing it. And then I pinned it with toothpicks, and then obviously those would create holes, but I knew I was going to paint it. So when I went back, I just clipped with wire cutters the toothpicks, and then made it flat, and then just painted over top of it, and nobody knows the difference. And that worked really well.
Yeah, it looks really good. It definitely makes the scene.
And then that's just the hot knife or whatever, and that's just cutting the design into the little decorative things that sit on the side of it. And I just drew out a bunch of squiggly lines and stuff, and then just went for it. And it's one of those things, like, as long as it's in the right spirit of it, it looks like it's purposeful.
Yeah, and since it's like a weathered place, once you paint and weather it, it would just blend right in.
Mm-hmm. But this was a little nerve-wracking to look at my phone light now.
Yeah.
This was
your phone all the time.
Yeah, this is a little nerve-wracking to do. All right, and then the throne room. Now, have you seen the 3 3/4 one we made? This is the same principle, bigger scale. We actually used the 3 3/4 one as a template to draw out the lines for this one because the other one turned out so good. and it's just the same stuff, just a hot pen. This is one that plugs into the wall. It's a soldering pen, and it works like a champ, but it does get too hot for styrofoam. So it's like I'm unplugged there, but I'm still scoring lines, and it's just a matter of getting used to the equipment and then knowing when and how and to stop, because it's hard to pull yourself away from a project sometimes.
I'd say that is a piece of essential equipment, just as essential as a knife.
Yeah, definitely. It's it really comes in handy, and it does a good job. You just have to be on top of it. So this was me drawing out the lines for the arch. I don't have much footage of this because it was a pain to film because of the reflection in the glass, and my kids were running around crazy. It was during the summer. But yeah, this was a lot of leg work, but it
It's more like arm work.
Yeah. It was tedious, just tedious stuff. But this is another one of those things that ends up selling it. The devil's in the details.
Yeah, it was double. You had to like draw it in, and then you had to engrave all that stuff.
Yeah. It's just the type of work that gives me a headache when I'm done. I look at some of the stuff that Pinkerton does with Crashbox, and I think about all the time it must have took to carve each one of those bricks, and it's just like, it's the sort of stuff that just gives you a headache.
I don't know how much you charge, but it's not enough for all that work. For the detail that he puts into that stuff?
Yeah. I talked to him. We might be doing some commission work maybe for some, if he was like overwhelmed with anything. I was like, you can throw it to Smash Crates.
Smash Crate!
But yeah, so I just drew out a rough plan, and once again, I wasn't trying to make it exact. I was just trying to make it close enough. So I just drew out a rough plan on the styrofoam with like a pen and carved it out. Now, this is a pro tip. If you have kids, there's this thing called child labor. There's laws against it. You just have to be careful about it. So my kids always want to help with stuff, as I'm sure everybody's kids do. So like when anything needs like a base coat, I always tell them like, hey, you want to paint some stuff? And they're always super excited to do it. So I took them into the basement, got the pieces that all needed base coats, and then gave each one of them a brush. And like you can see right now, like my little one's all irritated because she has nothing to paint, and it saves me a ton of work. And I hate laying base coats down on stuff. It's boring. I don't mind doing the detail work, but that, and then she, all right, how about you do some touch up? And then how about you touch her up? And and then like everybody's happy, and I get work done for no effort, which is nice. And then this is me just putting finishing touches on, making sure that all the little grooves and stuff are done. So now they're doing I think that's the back plate. So this was the painting method that I used, which was extremely effective. It's a 3-part process. So the base coat was the darker brown, and then I used a sponge, and just like a sea sponge, I think is what they're called, and just laid down and I turned my wrist like 90 degrees almost with each time I put the sponge down, so that the pattern isn't identical every time that I make a blot, so to speak. And I did, I think, 2 different browns on top of the dark brown, and it helps give it that worn feel, but it doesn't do it perfectly. But I think I got the perfect look, and I'll show you how I did that here in a minute. But it's just like, and it's just a matter of eyeballing it and telling when you're happy with the finished result. But it's pretty quick, and the results are pretty effective. I think it's our best painted walls to date.
Yeah, it looks really good.
It just works. And then so that's already been washed with a black wash, and then I'm dry brushing it with 2 shades of lighter gray over top, and then I painted some green, some watered down green underneath where the gargoyle heads were going to be, just to give it like that oxidized metal like corrosion onto the stone. And this is easy dry brushing. You just take all the paint basically off the brush, and you always have this little residue left, and just run it across, and it picks it up on the edges of the material. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. A lot of return on your investment.
Yeah, it's just like the sponging. Like a lot of this stuff is like technique, like knowing the technique will save you time and give you real good results.
And this is me figuring out what colors I want to use. And that was too much paint on my brush right there, so I just went back, took a little bit more off, and then as you go over the stuff that has a little bit more paint, it starts spreading it out anyway. And like it's never going to be perfect. Like you can still see it's a little heavy on the paint in that one section, but it doesn't really take away from it, because life is like that, and there's imperfections, and there's heavier spots of brighter colors and darker colors. So It's just knowing when to stop, kind of. So this is the key. So this is a really, really watered down brown paint. And I did that around the edges, and then I went back with just a brush with water and went and mixed water around the edges of the brown that's already really watered down, and it kind of blends from one to the other, and it gives this look of like this real, like water's been dripping down this wall for 100 years, and this is what it looks like as a result of it. It's very selling, I'd never done it before. I was like, I bet you this would work, and I gave it a shot. And I think at some points I even lift up the walls on one side or the other so that it naturally drips down, just to kind of give it more of that illusion. And this is just the same thing, dry brushing the base of the steps and everything, and adding some sand for some texture, and business as usual here. And then this is adding that same effect around all the creases and stuff in the lines and the steps to kind of give natural shadow around everything. And then I go back with a water brush and just thin it out. And it works like a champ. So there's the same thing here, sponge technique for the arc. And then this is the railing. I bought this 3D printed from Layered Creations. Shout out to them. You can find them on Facebook. He's been really good to me, and I just bought some more stuff from him recently to do in the future. 3D printed railing and gargoyle heads, which we'll show later on. And then this is that same technique, a watered down brown around the edge, and then a brush with water added to smooth out the line between where you painted the brown. And it looks really good. Because it's almost like a wash, but it's like it's not.
Yeah, and it blends everything together. It's not so stark with the sponge colors.
And it gives it like a little bit more variation in shadow and life. And then there's the finished thing. Those gargoyle heads there, I got those from Lair Creations. The things in the back I made out of bottle caps with like safety pins through them. The chains and stuff were from a daughter's necklace that she didn't want anymore.
That, quote unquote, didn't want anymore.
Yeah. So those are the gargoyle heads I got. I painted those a dark green and then dry brushed them with 3 shades of gold and copper. And then
the rings?
They were from a keychain.
Yeah.
And I clipped out the middle of the keychain with just enough tension where it would hold around the mouth. That's a leather strip you can get from Michael's on Jabbas Throne. And I hot glued that to the throne so that it curled around the edges because that gives it a little bit of weight. And there's the railing that I painted. That's from Layered Creations also.
That's a good tip because fabric hardly looks right because it don't fall right.
Exactly.
So you have to glue it down like that to make it heavy looking.
Exactly. Now for the barbecue in the back, you can't see it. And just like that thing there, that backpack, just like extra 3 3/4 stuff I had sitting around, and then you just glue it into the wall and it just looks natural, like some sort of control of something, and that's another one.
You painted it too.
Yeah. I spray painted them black and then painted them silver and bronze. That wire right there, that pipe or whatever, is from a Spawn figure. Once again, painted it black, dry brushed it silver. A little bit of necklace hung around 3 3/4 weapons that we plugged into the barbecue. Unfortunately, you can still see where my pen mark drew the protractor lines underneath. If you run the video back a bit, but it's not a big deal.
I wouldn't have noticed if you didn't say anything.
Right. And then the chain on the side, same thing from the leftover necklace that my daughter had. And yeah, like the wall, that wall looks so bloody good. It just really, really turned out well. There's the chain again, and I just thumbtacked that into the back. Like it's just tacked in on one side, tacked in on the other side. And then I used part of the chain for around, for Leia on a Jabbas thing. And I mean, that's pretty much it. I'm really proud of this. I think it's our best one so far.
I think so too. I'm trying to think what's the best one so far, but I guess this would have to be it.
Yeah. And that's it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Till next time, take care.